welcome to episode 19 of the Wokeish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Zelma.
And we want to announce that we have officially surpassed 1,000 listens on our podcast. And so we want to thank y'all so much for your support and your continued listening and all of that stuff. We, again, want to encourage you to give us feedback, if maybe in the form of comments on the podcast app, or even, sending us a DM or an email or a tweet or whatever if you're enjoying it. Yes, so thank you so much for helping us to get to this point. Definitely, obviously, couldn't have done it without y'all. Yeah, and we'll continue to try to give you content that you enjoy.
Yes.
So we'll get started with our shout-out segment. First on the docket...
Yes, the first shout out goes to Simone Biles, and if you guys don't remember who she is, she was on the U.S. gymnast team in the last Olympics. She recently became the first woman to win 5 U.S. all-around titles. So that means that there were 5 events at the Women's U.S. Gymnastics Championship, and she won first place in all of them. So she literally won every event. What makes it great is not only is she a black woman, but she had taken a 2-year hiatus, and I follow her on Instagram, so she has definitely been having the time of her life. Shout out, she's from Houston.
Oh,
so
is she?
yeah. So, always showing love for people from H-Town. Mm-hmm. And she wore a teal-colored leotard that she designed herself to acknowledge the victims of sexual abuse. Teal is the color of how they have little ribbons, mm-hmm. where each color stands for something, and teal is for victims of sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And so she recently acknowledged that she was among one of the over 100 women to be abused by Larry Nassar, which was the former U.S. gymnast doctor. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it was cool that she not only designed the leotard herself, mm-hmm. but found a way to stand in solidarity with them. Mm-hmm. She's, just doing great things, and she's really young and just really excited. So just wanted to shout out Simone Biles. Really inspirational woman, and hopefully, we see more good things from her.
Yeah.
And the second shout out I wanted to highlight is the movie Crazy Rich Asians. They did really well at the box office in their opening weekend, and they are now the #1 movie in America, earning $25.2 million opening week. Crazy Rich Asians is the first major box office film to have a predominantly Asian American cast since the Joy Luck Club debuted 25 years ago.
25 years.
Yeah, it's almost our lifespan.
It's so, when I saw that, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And I had to rack my brain, that's so true.
I don't remember.
Yeah, and I've never seen a movie with...
Yeah. And what I liked is I was reading an article, and there was a quote from one of the actresses, and she said, why they asked her why Crazy Rich Asians was so important, and she said, because seeing your existence not just represented, but also acknowledged and understood is deeply moving when you're only used to seeing shoddy, cheap copies. Invisibility doesn't have a stinging effect as much as a numbing one. You get used to just not being there. Mm. And so I just thought, this podcast isn't just about one particular racial group. It's about, just being a minority, the experiences of being a minority in general. And so just wanted to highlight that kind of shout out to the Asian American community. And although there's been some criticisms by people saying that it wasn't doing enough, I just always think we've got to celebrate any progress, and this is a good start. And so to have an Asian American cast be part of the #1 movie in America, I think is great. So shout out to Crazy Rich Asians.
That's something that I definitely took for granted. Especially being so wrapped up in my own shit, black issues and all that stuff. It's things that don't even consider but are also important.
Yeah.
Okay, so our third shout out goes to Taraji P. Henson, who launched the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation in honor of her late father in order to help eradicate the stigma around mental health issues in the African American community and provide support for and bring awareness to mental health issues that plague this community. So Henson is quoted saying, "I named the organization after my father because of his complete and unconditional love for me, his unabashed, unashamed ability to tell the truth, even if it hurt, and his strength to push through his own battles with mental health issues. My dad fought in the Vietnam War for our country, returned broken, and received little to no physical and emotional support. I stand now in his absence, committed to offering support to African Americans who face trauma daily, simply because they are Black. Yeah, so I was really moved by this. I mean, I love Taraji in general, and I think, you know, mental health is something that we have given a lot of attention to in the course of, you know, this podcast. And I just love to see something like this, because I think that I've been really impressed with celebrities in general, but Black celebrities in particular over the last, you know, just few months, in how they're like taking charge. You know, they're recognizing that when it comes to politics and support from politicians for the Black community, like it's really absent, you know, especially genuine support is pretty absent. And so they're stepping up to the plate and they're saying, you know what, like, these are issues that I recognize and they're pervasive. And I mean, who better to do it than me, who has received support from this community?
Yeah.
You know, I've seen, I think, probably all of Taraji's movies, even the really shitty ones. And and so offering that support and then seeing that what she's doing in return is awesome. And then our last shout out goes to Serena Williams, who maybe y'all are tired of seeing this news, because apparently she's been doing it for 3 consecutive years. But she topped the Forbes list as the highest earning woman athlete for the 3rd consecutive year in a row. So, yes, in a row. Due to her pregnancy in January 2017, Williams was off the court for the majority of the past year, leaving her with only $62,000 in winnings. Still, the 23-time Grand Slam champion collected twice as many off-court coins than any other female athlete, earning $18.1 million in endorsements. Williams was able to top the list by over $5 million. So, shout out to Serena, continuing to wow us and do phenomenally just all the time. I mean, I still wish that she would build that tennis court in Compton that her and her sister promised like 2 decades ago, but that's neither here nor there. It's neither here nor there. There's time.
Yeah, so we had a lot of shout outs this week.
Yeah. So I mean, it was a good week. I was pretty absent from the news, so I didn't get to see all the, like, you know, pretty shitty things that were happening, but
yeah, there's a lot of 45 stuff that I don't want to get into, but
it never stops.
Yeah, it was nice. It's nice to focus.
I mean,
on other things.
Almost gave a shout out about that. I almost did, but I was like, nah, not there yet. Okay, so now we'll transition into our In the Know segment. Okay, so now for our In the Know segment.
Yes. So the first In the Know topic I wanted to highlight was something that I saw online that brought me happiness, because I've actually been to this university. I visited it. And so there's a story about protesters who tore down a Confederate statue at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, deep in the South. And so the group was estimated to be around 300 people, which is a lot for like a campus event. And they toppled what they call Silent Sam statue that was erected in 1913. So not even like during the Civil War, like years and years after the Civil War. That's the case
with most of these statues. Yeah. And we act like, oh my God. Well, we don't.
Yeah.
But,
it's history. Yeah. It's like, no.
Yeah, right when people are like, oh my God, they've been here forever. No, they have not.
Yeah. To represent alumni from the university that died during the Civil War but fought for the Confederacy.
The losing side.
Team. Like, where else would you see a statue of people from the losing side? And only one person was arrested. So, out of 300 people, I thought that was great. But when I was reading about who the Silent Sam statue was, they pulled a quote from like the person, they just pulled a quote just kind of signifying like these are the type of people that we're highlighting. And it was like this Confederate soldier that talked about how he, like, I think it's what you call when you flog someone or like whip someone. So he whooped a black woman in public because she disrespected a white woman, and he said that he hit her so hard that her clothes like shredded off, and that the woman tried to get kind of claim sanctuary at the university. And so making it like even more horrific, like the fact that it's like these types of events that to some people they're saying maybe this statue represents a time in history or like people in history, because these were technically American soldiers who died even though they fought for the Confederacy. But then you have to like think about like what that person or what this statue represents for a lot of other people, and that represents like, you know, type of like it still represents racism, and it represents a time where certain people, like in particular Black people, weren't considered people. They weren't considered humans. They weren't even considered a full human. And so I think the fact that this statue was erected so much after the Civil War, that it represents people who fought for the Confederacy and not just a soldier of the Civil War, made it that much more, like, I think, disgusting. And so I was just really glad that it was the students themselves. So like students at this university taking it into their own hands to say like, we don't want this here, instead of waiting for the government to vote on whether this should be something that should be removed. And so shout out to the protesters. You know, this was nonviolent. It was just their agenda was to remove it, and they did so in a way that only ended with only one person being arrested. So good for you, students of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and hopefully this inspires. I know there's been a lot of other stories where people have kind of like protested against statues, and I think that for some people they may just be meaningless, but for a lot of us it represents a lot of silencing and marginalization and oppression that can easily be, that we can deal with. Like, if we can't have our fight against racism in many other ways, the least we can do is not have a physical representation of it at our campus.
Yeah, where like people walk by and praise this. Like, why does this person deserve praise?
Yeah, out of so many other people that don't have monuments, or like no Harriet Tubman monument.
People are always, I listen to these conversations, like these, well, I don't want to call them conversations, like debates, you know, between the left and the right, where they're like, you know, the right is like, oh, this is a piece of history and all of these things and yada, 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 and ode to the South and all of that. But it's like, what would it make sense to you to have a statue of Hitler erected and then force, you know, Jewish folks to walk by this statue every day? Like, no, that's ridiculous. And you understand how ridiculous it is when it's a different group, but when it's about Black people, it's like, oh, I don't understand why you have a problem with this. It's just a statue. It's just
history.
Like, no, this is ridiculous.
So they weren't in our shout out, but I wanted to shout out the protesters, but also kind of highlighting, you know, young people can get shit done. And so, you know, if you see something and there's a way to go about it without
that doesn't involve red tape.
I mean, for real, like sometimes you just gotta do shit on your own, and so good for them.
Knock down the statue,
right?
Okay, and for our second in the know, this was something that I saw kind of all over CNN all week. And this past week, around 170 estranged relatives from North and South Korea met each other for the first time in more than 60 years. They are members of families that were separated after the Korean War and were trapped on either side of the demilitarized zone, which now splits the two Koreas. They were the 89 lucky families selected from the more than 57,000 who had applied for the reunions. Agreed to under the, I'm going to mispronounce all of this, but the Panmunjom Declaration signed by South Korean President Moon Jae-in and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during an historic summit earlier this year. And so I actually watched some of these reunions, and I mean, like, talk about tearjerkers.
I mean, you can see them on Instagram.
Yeah, and it's like, these people are like 90 years old.
I know.
And they haven't seen like their siblings,
you know what they look like. Yeah,
and it's so, I don't know. This was like, you know, just to see the visual of how political conflict could influence those types of relationships or affect those types of relationships to the extent that, I mean, 60 years is a really long time. A lot of people have probably passed away and all of that stuff while they're just trying to be reunited with their families. So it was a beautiful thing. I'm glad that happened. And now we will shift into our What's Being Slept On segment, where we'll be discussing the experiences of surviving/conquering poverty.
So I strongly suggest that you wake the fuck up.
So for this week's What's Being Slept On topic, Zelma and I will be discussing surviving and conquering poverty. So actually for the next few weeks, y'all are going to be doing a lot of getting to know us because we are spending the next few episodes kind of really personalizing it a little bit. And so to start out, I kind of just wanted to give you a little bit of a few statistics to contextualize the topic. And so according to Huffington Post, 1 in 11 children, that's approximately 6.5 million nationwide, live in extreme poverty, which is an average of about $12,000 per year for a family of 4. But the kind of poverty threshold hasn't really been, I mean, as far as I found, really changed very much over the last few years. And so the threshold in the United States are updated and used for mostly statistical purposes. In 2015, in the United States, the poverty threshold for a single person under 65 was an annual income of $11,770. And the threshold for a family group of 4, including 2 children, was $24,250. But it is important to note that this threshold is is a national threshold, but that the experience of poverty or the experience of being poor will vary depending on the region. And so $24,000 looks very differently in the middle of Texas or in rural America than it does living in a major city like Los Angeles. So living in Los Angeles with $24,000 a year is, I guess to put it lightly, a struggle. Where rent prices are upwards of $1,000, depending on what part of the city you live in, $3,000 if you live in the nice part of the city like downtown. In Houston, you can get your rent down to $500 depending on where you live. So just to give you a little bit of context before we dive into the questions that we kind of put together for one another.
Yeah, and also that this was, extreme poverty is considered having that income, but we also are very aware that, you could have one parent making $50,000, but if you have 6 people in the house, someone with disability or a lot of debt or a lot of medical bills or a lot of, you might still be living in poverty, but by federal standards, you're not living in extreme poverty. And so just kind of, because that has been the experience of my family as well, and when we're talking about it, we've kind of gone through different stages in my families where we had practically no income to having someone making about $60,000 but having so much debt that we were still living in poverty. And so just as Ebony said, wanted to contextualize and say that poverty is very different and it's very complicated and very nuanced, but the effects that poverty has on your health, on your emotional well-being, on your mental health, and even on your academic success is very much real, and it can be very similar. No matter poverty is poverty, and so. Yeah, so we have a couple of questions that we're just going to ask each other and talk about. And so, Ebony and I are both PhD students, and so we spend a lot of at least for me, I'm sometimes, the most educated person that I know sometimes, and that outside of school and then in school, I'm with people who don't share very many similar experiences. So in school settings, I know very few people who actually experience poverty, but I know a lot of people who study it. And so Ebony and I find ourselves, our whole concept of this podcast is that we're hood adjacent academics, because we're not only academics and we study these things, these concepts, poverty and its effect, but we also have the actual backstory and experience of having gone through that ourselves. And so the first question we just kind of wanted to put out there was just giving you guys sort of a background as to how our family was growing up and what our economic kind of context was, so that you can kind of get an idea of where we're coming from.
You want to go first?
Yeah, so, my family was undocumented. So my mom is like the American story where she came here with like $20. My mom came here to meet up my stepdad, who was the only person working. So my mom didn't speak English. She wasn't here legally. My stepdad wasn't here legally at that time either. And so he was getting paid pretty much under the table. And so we lived in we lived with relatives. We lived in really different places, but when we first started, we were like poor and we couldn't qualify for any public assistance because after 1996, they did the welfare reform, and then when my family came here, they didn't really know anyway how to apply for things. And so, I was born in 89. I came here when I was 6 months old. So in the early 1990s, I was here, but my mom and my stepdad didn't take any government assistance because there was a rumor that if you did, then the government wouldn't give you citizenship. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people believe that immigrants come here and they automatically are like, get me on public assistance, get me on Medicaid, get me on welfare, get me on food stamps. But there's a lot of talk that there's this belief that if you try not to get government help, then the application process will be easy, because there are a lot of immigrants who come here and are like, okay, I'm going to come here legally, and then I'm going to start the process of citizenship application. And so that was the case for my family. And so we didn't get any government help initially when we first started. And so I just remember living with like my stepdad's like brothers and sisters, and we would literally all be sharing one room, and we would pay what we could because we couldn't pay rent. But I was 6 months, my sister was 1 year old, and then my mom got pregnant with my twin brothers, who are 2 years younger than me. So my mom couldn't work. My stepdad was the only person working, but he was working under the table, so he had to get a lot of cash jobs. So growing up initially, we were just pretty much living with relatives. We're shifting around wherever relatives would hold us, because my mom always says after fish and the guests are the same, and that after 3 days they both stink. So it's like you can only stay with someone for free for so long. And then I think after a while my stepdad was able to get a job, and he was able to get a 1-bedroom apartment, and in that 1-bedroom apartment we all lived. So my mom and my stepdad had their bedroom, and then the living room was actually where my sister, myself, and my 2 brothers shared a room. So like people would walk into our apartment and our room would be right there, because we didn't have a living room, we just had our bedroom. So all of us were living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, and by then I had started school, and I still was undocumented. So I just remember a lot of times not being able to I couldn't share information about like what my parents' names were, what my name was, what my birthday was, where I was from. It was like all about not being able, so we weren't able to really lean on our neighbors because we didn't trust a lot of people, and it wasn't even that great of a neighborhood anyway, because there was a lot of other, I think, immigrant people. But yeah, so that's the context of my family. Just, literally, we're like that story of people really coming in with like the shirt. My mom literally came with the shirt off her back, and so having to start from scratch. And now my mom has a job, but I don't know if she has, it's not like she saved money and is now in like 20 years later in this country. If you look at her, she doesn't have any savings. So I think like in her bank account, last time I saw, there was like $150. So like 20 years later, my mom has $150 in her bank account to show for it. So that's just kind of like the context of my family. What about yours?
Well, I actually don't know as much about like my parents' finances, like actual, what the numbers look like. But so I'll just say that before I like start talking about like what my family was like growing up. So I'm from Compton. We lived with my grandparents for the majority of my childhood until I was in 11th grade. So it was like me, my parents are still married till this day. So yeah, like about 30 plus years actually. I'm getting that wrong. It's been like 34 years, I think. So yeah, me, my parents, my sister and brother, my grandparents, and my cousin. Lived with my grandparents. And yeah, I mean, I knew from, I don't know, it's weird because I knew from a very young age that like we were poor. But at the same time, it's like if everybody around you is poor, like you don't, like we, it wasn't like it was a felt thing, you know, versus if I had lived, I don't know, in a fairly like, you know, decent kind of city or neighborhood and like we were the poor ones. So it wasn't like we, like I don't remember ever really, I think that maybe we learned to scale the wants that we had, like the wants that we had with where we were as a family, like economically, because I never wanted anything that I did not get, but I never wanted anything that I couldn't get. You know, I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, so like it's like, you know, even though like before we did this episode, I was looking at a blog post on, I can't remember what the little site is called, BuzzFeed, and it was like, oh, like, you know, there was this I guess trending topic on Twitter about like hashtag growing up poor, and you know, there were things like, oh, you know, turning 16 and not getting a car, like you just turned 16, and it's like, well, I never expected a car. Like, you know, like that wasn't even something that crossed my mind, like it's something to ask for. So there are things like that I think that maybe for other people were kind of normative, that like, okay, when you, maybe not when you turn 16, but when you turn 18 or something like that, at some point your parents buy you a car or buy you whatever. That was not an expectation that I ever had. And then I think too, like the fact that there were, like, so we lived in a multi-generational household, right? And so I think that also, I mean, not even think, I know that helped my parents a lot, and my grandparents, you know, because it was like, okay, we have our younger child here and our in-law and, you know, our grandkids, and so it's like, oh, that's nice to have grown, it was nice to have grown up with my grandparents and things like that, and they, you know, had help around the house and all of that. But then it's also like a financial kind of, takes a little bit of the burden off to be able to share some of that financial burden with other people. And so I think that did it. I mean, the next question is going to be like, how did growing up poor shape your childhood? And I think it actually helped mine a lot, because then there was more money left over to be able to buy, like, you know, things for Christmas, like gifts for Christmas, and, you know, I don't know, you know, my grandma, like, she took us to buy, like, a big thing was, you know, buying me and my cousin and I new shoes, like when the school year started. Like, that was like this thing that, you know, she was like, okay, you guys ready to go get your shoes, you know? But I can imagine that if we had not lived with them, maybe the money would not have been there to buy things like that. And so my childhood would have looked a lot differently. I think, you know, an experience that is also pretty different, I think, from a lot of people is that I went to private school for elementary and middle school. And so that now, you know, being in college and then being in grad school, you hear a lot that, like, private school is this, like, you know, kind of bougie thing to do, right? But that also lived, like, there were sacrifices that, you know, my parents made to be able to do that. Like, it wasn't like, okay, we're doing well, so we're gonna send our kids to private school. It's like, no, we're gonna take money out of literally everything else. You know, so my parents are gonna drive one car. We're gonna do things like that so that we can make sure that, yeah, while we live in Compton, like, the kids are not gonna go to school. Like, we went to school in Compton, but it was a private school in Compton. So it was like, you know, they made sure that our education did not suffer within the context of, like, where we were living. And then, I mean, by the time I went to, like, public school and high school, like, I was pretty good, you know, like, academically. So yeah, that's a pretty condensed, kind of watered down-ish, you know, like, discussion about my childhood. But yeah, so, like, what are some of your, like, fondest memories? Like, how do you think, and not just, like, fondest memories in general, but I guess I was thinking, like, you know how like, poor kids always, they look like they're having a ton of fun, you know, and it's like there's less, this is in my generalization, but less supervision, like, you know, you're forced to be creative, you find ways to have fun that aren't like, oh, have this brand new X, Y, and Z that I'm playing with. It's like, no, we're gonna make something, and you know.
I think I had more of a negative. I definitely did not have a good childhood because of poverty. And I think that's compounded by the fact that my mom was a victim of domestic violence. So, you know, we would go to women's shelters a lot. So we would be, like, technically homeless. So, and that is, like, really early on where I don't even kind of remember. But like earlier memories is, you know, one of the jobs my mom had was being a housekeeper. So she would clean people's houses, and she would bring my sister and I to work with her. And my mom didn't have a car, and so we would have to take the bus. And I just remember, like, even being like 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to high school, I'd go to work with my mom, and like spending my summers cleaning houses, spending anytime I didn't go to school, I'd go to work with my mom, and like she wouldn't just like have me sit there, she'd like have me help her. So like, you know, dusting and vacuuming. It's like a little 7-year-old girl just like cleaning someone else's house. And so like I remember a lot just always feeling like there was never vacation, there was never fun, there was a lot of responsibility, a lot of seeing my mom, like, you know, sometimes we'd have to take 3 buses just to get to one house, and we would do like two to 3 houses a day. And so it was just kind of like from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. just like outside of the house cleaning houses, and then coming home and like cleaning our own house. And so I think that shaped a lot of currently my lack of it's a both positive and negative in terms of I have my work ethic is I can sit down somewhere for 12 hours and like crank out a paper or read something, but it also makes me less compassionate about other people who have a different upbringing and who like get tired, like who quit their job because it was too hard. And so I would just be like, you're so lazy, like you don't know what it's like to work hard. And so I think it's shaped me into a cynical, bitter, but also very hardworking and like developing a really good work ethic. But I guess fondest memories would just be that I don't expect anything. So like for birthdays, for Christmas, like it's really hard for me to think of things that I want. So I never like want things. And so I know there's lots of people that are like, oh my gosh, if I could get these shoes, if I could get this purse, if I could get this vacation, if I could get this computer, if I could get this phone. Like I never had any of that. And so to me it was just like I didn't really expect. My mom did what she could for my birthday, so she'd give me like, you know, $50, which is a lot for her. Or, you know, we'd go out to dinner, a nicer dinner, and she'd pay for it. And so growing up now, it's like I just am very appreciative of if whatever gift you give me, I'm really going to appreciate it because I just don't really expect anything. And so that's been like really helpful. And just, I guess in general, like poverty really makes you rely on your family or your siblings in a way that I don't think other people who weren't in poverty have. And so I'm super, super close to my siblings, closer than I think a lot of other people are to theirs. And we're not only like siblings, but we're friends. And we have that shared like experience of going through like some really hard shit and experiencing it. And like my other friends who were also poor, I have a really strong bond with them because like we just have experienced so many things that a lot of people haven't. And so I think that what's fondest for me is the bond that I've had of like getting $2 raspas, you know, and like really enjoying that and just being able to enjoy really simple things where I know a lot of people have just looked back and just been like, I just feel really unfulfilled and unhappy. And I look back and I'm like, I'm just really glad that I was able to really I can enjoy even the simplest of things because I didn't really have a lot.
Yeah. So one of my favorite, like most favorite things to do as a kid was go to summer camp. And so I think that is one of the, I want to say perks of being like a poor kid, is that they have all of these like summer things that, I mean, it's like, oh, you know, in order for you to do this, your parents have to make less than X, Y, and Z, you know? So you have all of these kids from, and then, I mean, again, like, before, so this was pre-high school, and, like, I went to private school, and this was, like, a tiny, I'm talking about, like, there was maximum, while I was there, 20 kids. Like, from all grade levels, from, like, pre-K to 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
Like, 20, maybe 25 kids at one point. But, I mean, I was tired of those kids. You know, it was like, these were the same, like, I started that school with these kids and graduated with them. So, getting to go to summer camp and meet kids that, like, you know, from all over the place, from all parts of LA and all of that, yeah, that was, like, my favorite thing to do. And, I mean, I feel like when I look back on it, you know, I think that, and right now, like, I love to travel. Like, I love getting away, and traveling is probably my favorite thing to do. And I feel like it started then. Like, I mean, even though I'm technically poor now, like, technically just because I don't really have income, but, you know, because I'm in school, but I'm not, like, running away from anything right now. Like, I think that then I know I was running away from home. You know, it was like, I can get away for this week and have the time of my life, you know, like, no drama. It's just, like, building friends, and then you would make friends, and then y'all would make sure to go back to the same session the next year. And you know the craziest part of this? So, this summer camp that I went every year for, like, I don't know. I think I went for the first time when the youngest age that you could go. I want to say I was, like, 9. And I went until I was, like, maybe I was 8. Maybe 8, until I started high school. And this was UCLA Unicamp. And then I ended up at UCLA, which is so, like, just random and ironic.
Yeah.
But this camp was, like, amazing. Like, it was, I mean, you know, like, the food was crazy good, you know, like, 3 meals a day, snacks, and all this stuff. I mean, you had to do chores and all that, but, I mean, and then we were, like, our camp counselors were, like, UCLA undergrad students who, like, as a 8-year-old to, like, 14, like, they seemed hella old at the time. But then getting to school and realizing, like, oh, you know, when I was 8, I was being advised by people who were, like, 18, 19, you know? But yeah, I mean, so I think that those are some of the best memories that I have, like, camping. It was, I mean, sadly, I'm not really very close friends with any of those people. I mean, I still do, like, I still know a few of them, and, like, from Instagram and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, so yeah, getting to reap some of those benefits, like, poor kid summers, they were pretty good. Yeah. Okay, so next question. When did you realize that you were poor?
I think when I went to other people's houses. But other people. So when I was in like, all Spanish classes, so all my friends were also poor and immigrants. And then some second grade, I went to all English classes because they did, like, some testing and realized, like, oh, she's actually, like, I don't know. They just moved me to English classes, and I was, like, the only Hispanic person in the whole room, and so all my friends were white. They were white. So all my friends were white now, because the way segregation works in the city that I grew up is that the gifted and talented classes are all white, and the all bilingual and quote unquote regular classes are mostly Latino. And so they made us all take a test, and apparently I tested high enough where they put me not only in English classes, but in gifted and talented classes. And so all my friends started becoming, you know, all the friends that I started getting were white, and so they would invite me over to their houses, and I'd be like, what? You have your own room? And then just, like, seeing their, you know, that each parent had a car, and then they would talk about going on vacation, and, like, what they told me that they did for, you know, for Christmas, and just, like, seeing that they had housekeepers when my mom was a housekeeper. And so just kind of, like, realizing that, like you said earlier, when everyone around you is poor, it doesn't really, like, I knew it was different because you know, I'd go to people's houses and I was like, those people are rich, you know, the people whose houses we clean. But then I realized, no, they're actually like middle class, and they're like people in my class, so they're not that rich. We were just poor. And so, you know, starting from there, I was like, oh, okay, I'm poor. And then getting into college and graduate school, where I learned about some of the programs and the benefits that my family were actually participating from, I was like, oh, these are for poor people, and that's what we had, and not everyone has this. And oh, like, that's what food stamps are, and oh, that's what this is, and oh, like, so I think it started in elementary school, but then just learning more and more about the extent of our poorness happened later. But yeah, it wasn't until I started seeing how other people lived, and in particular, like, other white people, because I grew up around mostly Latinos and immigrants, that I realized that my family was poor.
Yeah, I think I always knew that we were poor. I just didn't understand how poverty worked. Because like I said earlier, like, you know, we were poor, but my parents still gave me everything that I, you know, asked for. And so it was a little bit confusing to me, you know, but now that I'm grown, like, there is a such thing as, like, I was about to say hood rich, but my parents weren't hood rich. I mean, granted, like, my parents did not, like, do anything crazy or illegal or whatever, as far as I know. But so they weren't, like, hood rich, like, selling drugs or anything, but it's like they made sure that I think that throughout the year, you know, I know that they did things like layaway and all that stuff to make sure that, like, okay, when Christmas comes, like, we can get them things. So they made, like, their top priority was making sure that we didn't feel like, you know, that we didn't feel like we didn't go back to school and all these kids had all this stuff and we were like, oh my God, like, we're, you know. So somehow I always knew that we were poor. But I thought that all black people were poor. In that, like, I mean, like I said, I'm from Compton. I thought all black people and all Mexicans were poor because that was my experience. And it wasn't until I went to college that I was like, oh, you know, not all black people are poor. Like, I met black people that grew up with money, and they were very different than I was. You know, and it wasn't just like, oh, they had, like, when we talk about our childhoods, they had different childhood experiences, but, you know, like, obviously they did things like, yeah, they had, you know, they got cars when they came to college, like, that their parents bought them. Their parents were still paying their phone bill. Their parents were helping them with their rent. They were, their parents, you know, I met black people in college whose grandparents went to college. And I was just like, what? Like, I did not know that was a thing, you know? Like, my grandparents had, like, you know, like, elementary level educations. Like, I was like, what part of the country are you from where you have grandparents that went to college? How is that possible? Like, just kind of thinking about history, you know? But yeah, like, black kids who had been out of the country as a high school student or in middle school, like, just, things that I had just never heard of. To say, you know, I my parents were super proactive, especially when it came to education. It was like, okay, I think that they recognized the extent of their, you know, financial whatever capacity. And I remember, like, my dad, when I got into UCLA and my parents essentially decided I was going there, he took me to UCLA to the scholarship office. So I was a senior in high school. This was maybe May, like, as soon as I declared that I was going. Took me to the scholarship office, and I met with the scholarship person. She, like, printed out a list of everything I was eligible to apply for, and my dad was on me every day about, I want to say I applied for, like, 50 scholarships. And every day, he was like, did you work on your scholarships? Work on your scholarships every day after school. And then I got one that, like, paid for all of my school. And so it's like, you know, while there are downsides to, obviously, to being poor, you know, lots of things that, you know, Zelma and I have talked about that we missed out on. There are also other things where it's like, there are ways that there are ways of surviving, I guess I should say. So, and then, I mean, I kind of always imagined, like, I didn't know any white people, but I saw them on TV and things like that. So I just imagined that, like, it wasn't shocking to me to meet white people that had money. Like, I just knew that was a thing. But yeah, meeting black people that were well off, I was like, oh, so not only were we poor, like, relative to white people, but, like, we were poor relative to other black people that I had never come across, you know? And I mean, that's a product of growing up in a city where the city itself is, like, impoverished, you know? And it became so, like, even, like, when it comes down to, like, political views, and some of my friends who, like, I got into really heated arguments with in college because their perception of why black people were poor, and these are black people, like, so their perception of why other black people were poor was skewed, you know, because they just had no idea,
experienced it,
you know. So it was like having those conversations and realizing that, you know, there are black people in the world that are not, quote, like, woke, you know, like, or at the time I was saying conscious, you know, but, like, or progressive. Like, it was just so eye-opening, like, how much your class status can influence who you, like, how your lived experience. Like, I thought it was all about race before that. Yeah. You know, I just thought, like, all black people are the same. We all get each other. We all have the same experiences. Everybody grows up poor, then they go to college, and then they somehow, like, get jobs where they get money. I didn't realize that there were people that could start out.
Already with money. No, I mean, that's interesting.
And so how do you think that growing up in poverty shaped, like, who you are today?
I think the biggest thing is that I never think I'm better than anyone else. Well, I mean, there are some people who are shitty, and then I'm like, you ain't shit. But because they're shitty. But, like, in terms of, I don't look down on someone who's a janitor. I don't look down on someone without a college education. I don't feel like I can't relate to people. I don't feel uncomfortable. I could still go to a mostly really poor neighborhood, not feel like super, I mean, I'm still going to be, like, you know, aware, because, you know, anywhere, especially living in a big city, you don't want to get jacked. But I can feel really comfortable in lots of places. But I think the biggest thing is, like, I just don't think I'm better than anyone. Even now, on my way to getting a PhD, like, that doesn't, to me, make me better than someone who doesn't have a high school education. And I think that there are lots of people that I know that I've met through academia that don't say it but act that way, that they are better than people. Or are very condescending towards people, or, like, are really afraid of, or call them, like, hard to reach populations that you can't, like, how do I relate to someone, like, are they going to be comfortable with me? Like, that never crosses my mind, because I'm like, they're a person. And so I really like that. It helps me stay grounded being in mostly white spaces and mostly academic spaces, and helps me stay genuine. And so I really appreciate that. What about you?
I mean, I think that it made me, because, you know, I see myself as, like, this person with this dual identity, you know, and I think that is, I mean, I don't know, like, it's so empowering, like, it's, because, you know, we had one episode, you know, shameless plug, on code switching. And I think that that's one of the beauties of growing up poor, is that it's like, it's not just the language, but it's, like, in me, you know. I do kind of feel like a different person now, just because of the experiences that I've kind of, I don't know, I feel a way about saying created for myself, like I created anything for myself. But, you know, as an adult, I feel differently than the little girl that, you know, was living in her grandparents' house. But recognizing that is a part of me, and recognizing that I know what that feels like. So there, like you're saying, there's never a time where I'll feel like I'm better than anybody. Like, you can't, because it's like, that's still who, like, you might be in a different place now, but that's still part of what defines you. So I think that, you know, having that dual identity and being able to, like, you know, I have friends that, you know, I had from high school, and then I have friends now that are like that I met in a PhD program, and who, you know, I now have friends that are white where I never had white friends before, you know, and I can interact with and in certain ways relate to both of them. But even though I'm kind of like, you know, 1 foot in kind of the hood and 1 foot out, because I don't necessarily speak that language anymore entirely, like in its entirety, but I can relate. Like, there's some relatability there, and I think, you know, there's like a humbleness and a like genuineness that comes from having that kind of upbringing, where you just down to earth and relatable. And I think that the way that I look at the world and my appreciation for just all kinds of experiences, and recognizing that everybody has something different to bring to the table, regardless of whether they make a lot of money, regardless of what their education is, regardless of what their racial background is, or whatever. Like, you know, like appreciating people from all different walks of life and people with all different experiences. And I think, you know, like I think that nothing has really resonated with me more than, you know, I want to say this is the intro chapter, maybe it's chapter 1 in Patricia Hill Collins' Black Feminist Thought, where she's talking about how we need to appreciate and recognize people as intellectuals and scholars beyond just those who've had a formal education.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, I remember reading that and being like, that is so real, because there are so many people that have like all of these stories and all of this history and all of this intellect that don't get the credit for it just because they aren't in this, you know, setting, in an institution, you know? Yeah. And so I think that the ability to recognize and appreciate that, and to see the value in that, and to also aspire to give validity to those voices, is part of how, you know, I've been shaped. And then, you know, every once in a while I start craving like ramen noodles, and I'm like, you know, it's like, dang, I miss, you know. But the other day, actually, I have like 2 packs of top ramen in my pantry, and I went to eat it like last week or something like that, and then I looked at the back. So this is like the education part, because like I looked at the back and it has like 250 grams of sodium.
Yeah, I mean,
like literally,
I knew that shit couldn't be good.
My blood pressure like went through the roof just looking at it. But growing up, like, was the shit. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh my God, those are amazing.
They are.
And my grandma used to put butter in it, which is like,
oh my
worse.
gosh,
So like, cholesterol and sodium, just terrible. But it tastes amazing, and I put hot sauce. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Whew. Anyways, so yeah, have an appreciation for that. But then I also like, I don't know, what do I like? I don't know, what's something bougie? Like, I don't know, crab cakes, calamari, you know,
ordering
shit
your
like that.
water with lemon.
Oh, I don't do that. I do not do that. Something about that just makes me feel...
I do. It's the lemon makes it so good.
Really? I do not. I don't know why. No, you know what's even bougier than water with lemon? Sparkling water.
My sister does sparkling water, and I am just kind of like, look at where we've come.
Yeah, right? Okay, so what are some things that you think distinguish those who grew up poor from those who didn't?
I think that, so I was not only just poor growing up, but when I lived on my own, I moved out of my house when I was 18, and, I lived on my own, and I was poor then, like, not turning on AC poor, like, not having a TV poor, and so I know that anything could happen and I would be okay. I would figure it out. I can problem solve. I won't break down. That's good. But I've seen people freak out and melt down that didn't grow up poor over like the simplest shit. Yeah. Like car breaking down. How the fuck am I going to get to work? What am I going to do? And it's like, this is like a Tuesday in like my household. It's like, well, I guess you either take the bus or like, and so, or you walk, you know, figure out how long it takes. So I think the biggest thing is like problem solving. Like you can always find a way, and then like learning to lean on other people because that's going to help you problem solve. And then just the fact that I've gotten myself out of a lot of crazy shit, and so when something comes my way that's unexpected, I've never felt I can't do this. And I mean, I've gotten really close in grad school, but that's not because you know, that's just because grad school, like, eats at your soul.
Yeah.
But,
on purpose.
yeah, I think those are, like, kind of the things that I think distinguish people who grew up poor from those who didn't, from my opinion and my experience with people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll have to agree. I definitely think creativity, and definitely, like, strength and endurance. I mean, I do think that, so for people of color that grow up poor, for people of color that don't grow up poor, I think that there's still some of that endurance, just because it's like, you know, you, regardless of how much money, like, you still recognize that you're black or brown or whatever. So I think that, but I do think that people that grow up in poverty have a little bit more edge when it comes to that, and can tough things out. And so the thing is, though, I don't think that that's necessarily always a good thing, because I think that there are you know, physical and mental health implications of that, you know, or consequences, you know, just kind of like toughen it out when you should be laying down or whatever. Yeah, I mean, and so, like Zelma said, like, I have not reached the point yet where I have necessarily escaped poverty. Like, technically speaking, I live below the poverty line now as a grad student, but thinking about my economic potential is what continues to get me through this, because for whatever reason I decided not to work and to continue my education, and so I remain in poverty. I also think that, you know, empathy is a big thing too. That, you know, people that grow up poor have, and not from, because I want to distinguish empathy from, like, a, you know, like, superhero, I feel sorry for you like
savior
pseudo
complex.
Almost condescending kind of thing. So I think that we are able to be empathetic without, you know, like, oh, you know, poor you. It's like, no, like, okay, dang, that sucks, but how you gonna, you know, like, what are we gonna do? Let's figure this out, you know? I think that, let me think about the people that didn't grow up poor that I know, because I think that might actually be it. Yeah, creativity, toughness, empathy. Okay, so this question is, I think, specifically for you. What's it like to have friends or even a partner who had a very different upbringing?
I think there are a lot of, there's lots of good and bad things. The good thing is just, like, knowing that I think I'm a lot stronger than, it's okay, my partner doesn't listen to this podcast. I think I'm a lot stronger in some aspects about things. Like, I'm a really tough bitch in terms of, like, a lot of shit has, when I list when I list out my life and what I've overcome, people are like, whoa, like, that's crazy. And even I'm just kind of like, I've overcome a lot, I can do a lot, I'm really tough, nothing's gonna bring me down. In terms of, like, you know, my partner hasn't had a lot of obstacles to overcome, and the obstacles that he has had to overcome are not as, I think, complicated or difficult, I would say. Or, you know, it's like comparing apples to oranges, like comparing being homeless to, like, not being able to make it to a basketball team. Like, it's just, like, those types of obstacles we've had to overcome. But I think that, like, the most important thing I've seen is just, like, the wealth gap is, I would not believe it unless I saw it. And so, like, just, like, you know, I just, you know, in this episode talked about how my summers I would spend cleaning houses with my mom. So when my partner and I talked about our summers, he would, like, go to skateboard camp, like, in Oregon, and would tell me, like...
Skateboard camp?
Snowboard camp. He would go to snowboarding camp in Oregon with, like, professional people teaching him how to snowboard. A famous baseball player went to his birthday party. Like, And so just kind of, like, stories where I was like, we laugh because I'm just kind of like, who the fuck? Like, how the fuck is that your life? But it teaches me, like, there are people living, like, we're both from the same city. We both went to the same high school. We both, like, didn't live geographically that far from each other, but we lived completely different lives. Both of our parents are divorced, but still lived completely different lives. And so although we're very similar in some aspects, we're very different in how those aspects have shaped our experiences. And so he had a trust fund. I don't. His mom inherited like $250,000 when her dad died. My mom got nothing when her dad died. My mom actually had to help when her dad died. And so just kind of seeing, like, in the work that I do, I read about stuff, but it doesn't impact you in the same way as when you experience it yourself. And it gives me a lot more, it drives my passion for, like, saying, like, to people, now the networks that I'm in, the wealthier networks that I'm in, I get to tell them, like, you really don't know how poor people are. So my family is a representation of that. And so I'm very open with them, of telling them about my experience, of telling them about my childhood, of telling them about how poor we are. And I think that I'm actually one of the few poor people that they know, other than the people they employ. And so, like, you know, even recently we went to a lunch, and my partner's father paid for the lunch, and it was $400. And I just remember looking at the bill and thinking, I just cannot imagine. My mom doesn't, I can't even remember ever a time when my mom had that much in her savings, like, let alone spend on a meal. And so then just being like, having this conflict of feeling really bad that I was just a participant in that, like, wow, I just witnessed $400 being spent on food. And then also seeing the other side of, there are really people who live this way. And I can kind of see, like, if this is how you live, you have no idea how poor people live. So you have no idea how poverty works. So your policies and your ideals and you pull yourself up from your bootstrap, because if you had a $250,000, you know, trust or inheritance, and if both your parents are educated, have postgraduate degrees, if everyone you know is wealthy and everyone gets wealthier, then you really do think America is the best country and everything gets better. And for people like me who don't have that experience, it just makes you kind of, for me, it makes me understand, because I don't get how people can vote and think the way they do. I think, like, how can you be such a cruel person? But seeing, like, you just live in this bubble where everyone has such advantage because of your economic status, then you really think that this is how the world works. But the downside to that is you know, as the poor person in a rich person's world, you really feel like the poor people don't see what I'm seeing. So it's like, I don't even tell my mom sometimes of the shit I see. But it's like, I have to see both. I have to experience it, because I still, you know, I am not rich, but I'm not as poor as I was. But I always feel out of place. I didn't know how to, I had to look around to see which forks to use, because there would be times where there was like 4 forks and I didn't know which one I was supposed to eat with.
Like, why do we need all these forks?
Yeah, and so I think, like, having a partner who had a very different upbringing, I teach him a lot. And I think I've made him a better person in terms of, I've opened his eyes to, and I think one of the things that he likes about me is that I didn't grow up like he did. And so I have such a very different perspective than he has. And he has told me that he really appreciates that about me. But the hard part is that, you know, and this is the next question, is in terms of, like, children. And so, you know, I'm expecting now, and we have very different ways of, very different expectations and very different ideas about how to raise children, because our experiences growing up were so different. And so I have very rigid and strict, like, expectations for my child, because it's like, well, I worked so hard to get here, so my kid has to do better. And his ideal is like, just let him do whatever. We're not going to pressure him. We're not going to push him, whatever he wants to do. And I'm like, no, like, he has to do better. And he's like, but that's so much pressure for a kid. And I was like, that's what I had to do. Like, my parents came here from a different country expecting me to, you know, do well financially, do well educationally so that I can help. And my child has to, like, do that too. And not knowing how to separate that is really hard. And even now, like, doing the baby registry and seeing all this shit my baby's gonna have, and there's a part of me that's mad, that's like, are you fucking kidding me? This baby has so much more shit than I ever would have had as a kid. And being like, oh my gosh, is that bad that I'm mad at this my baby because my baby's
Yes.
But it's just like, I mean, I love my baby and I'm excited he's gonna have all this stuff, but there is a part of me that's like, damn, like, this is just so different than what one of the baby registry's options is you start a college fund and people can put towards the college fund. And I was just like, bitch, if someone would have done this for me, like, how different would my life would have been? And just kind of like trying to be like, man, everything would have been so different if money and wealth just really changes you. But, you know, ultimately I'm glad who I am. I'm happy with who I am. But, like, yeah, having a partner who's different, has a different upbringing, and now, you know, potentially, you know, being a mom and thinking about how to raise my kid definitely shows me that, like, people just have such different experiences, lead such different lives, and it's all based on where you happen to be born. And that just it will never stop blowing my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have like, me and my partner pretty much grew up, well, no, we didn't grow up the same. I grew up in Compton, but I wasn't, like, in Compton, you know, like, I was still very protected, like, my parents were very protective, and, you know, so I didn't have, like, friends on the block and stuff like that, so I would say that he probably grew up poorer than I did, or, like, lived more of the poor experience, I think, stereotypical poor experience, but, yeah, I mean, having friends that had a very different upbringing, yeah, I mean, I talked about it a little bit earlier, and college was my first encounter with that, and I don't know, it was weird, like, so while I did have to, my school was paid for, and anything extra that I wanted, you know, because it was like, as soon as I moved out of the house, every bill that I had, you know, every bill came to me, so I had to get a job, like, I bought my own first car when I started college, after I had my job for a little while, saved up through high school, because I was in a lot of internships and things like that, so that was a different experience from my friends, you know, like, I bought my car, but my car was, like, this, you know, $3,000, like, 1999 Honda Civic that was just when I bought it already, like, kind of falling apart, but I was happy. I was like, I mean, I got my wheels, I can go wherever, you know, so versus having friends whose parents had bought them cars, or, you know, who, like, I was working to pay my rent, and I had friends whose parents were paying their rent, or, like, I was working to pay my phone bill, or if I wanted to go anywhere, like, gas, register my car, fix my car, all of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it just, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, is it fair? But then at the same time, like, I'm here, but then I sometimes feel bad for, like, my parents, you know, who is, like, they did all of these things, sacrificed all of these things so that I could be here, but then they struggled, you know, from, like, while as long as I've existed, but, you know, for a significant part of my life. So I think that those are things that I think about, especially when I do encounter people that had different experiences. I'm like, wow, you know, your parents didn't have to make I mean, yeah, maybe they made sacrifices by, you know, working longer than they wanted to, or working, you know, I don't know, whatever the sacrifices they made, not to minimize anybody else's experience, but it's like, you know, I think it's a very different experience from, like, you know, working from, you know, sun up to sundown, you know, coming in, like, 3 a.m., like, there were, you know, so I one of the things is that, like, you know, I've didn't have a lot of time spent with my mom because she worked so much.
Yeah.
You know, so, like, getting home at, like, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., so I wouldn't, like, see her. And so those are, I think, some of the things that I do think about is the way that, like, poverty strained, like, relationships and, you know, kind of, you know, things that I did miss out on, like, not materialistic things necessarily, but things that are, like, you know, relationships that you need to carry you through life, and how being poor and struggling and working so much, like, parents miss out on a lot of the important things with their kids and stuff like that. So sometimes when I look at my friends and the relationships that they have with their moms or their parents in general, or extended family, because maybe you have extended family that lives in a different part of the country and y'all could afford to go visit them or whatever, you know. So thinking about things like that and how, and I think that that's the biggest, and, you know, the biggest thing that's on my mind when I think about, like, the consequences of growing up poor. But yeah, so that wraps up episode 19. There's a whole lot of vulnerability there, so hopefully y'all can appreciate this. And, you know, I mean, hopefully it touched some of y'all out there. If y'all had similar experiences, definitely write in and let us know. We are on, I think, all social platforms. Oh, we're not on Facebook, but what if? So you can find us on Instagram.
Yeah, at Wokeish Podcast, on Twitter.
At Wokeish Talk.
Or you can email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. Send us any feedback, any shout outs, you know, if you have similar experiences, if you learned something from us. But ultimately, we just wanted to share with you guys that, you know, we when we say that we come from the community, we really mean, we wanted you to know what community we were talking about.
We want you to know what hood adjacent.
Yeah, when we talk about, like, being poor and growing up from our experience, because where we come from shapes who we are. And so we wanted you guys to get a glimpse of where we come from, because we're in episode 19 now, and you heard a lot of our ideas, but we wanted you to get a glimpse of, like, why maybe we think the way we do.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not sure if my parents listen to this, but if you guys do, I love you guys. And I hope y'all are not mad.
So tune in next week for our 20th episode, where we're going to dive into some more vulnerability, where you get to know more about us, but in a much more fun and less, like, more downer way. But you know, we have to have those tough conversations in order to get through the happy ones. So
in order to appreciate the happy ones.
Yes. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.